What's going on, y'all? It's your girl, Mary B. Welcome back to another episode of Something's Gotta Give. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing my journey returning back to Brazil. Knowing how imperative the first few years of your life are to the making of your overall character arc, I knew at some point in my healing journey it was going to be vital for me to revisit the place where I experienced the most traumatic thing of my life. And through the last few years, I have been creating a lot of space, and I finally reached a point where I felt like it was time to go back to Brazil and pick up my inner child. And when I say pick up my inner child, I feel like a part of me stayed there, because after I came back, and especially after I was separated from my mother and no longer had a relationship with her, I felt like a part of me, a very big part of me, was left behind. And healing is integrating my inner child into the present version of me. And it really also helps with creating and feeling bliss and feeling just connected all together. So the time had finally came for me to go back to Brazil. Now, for years growing up, I allowed things to make me believe that I wasn't Brazilian to begin with, which is silly, but I was becoming so detached from the core of me that whatever anybody said, I attached to that story, regardless if I knew deep down it was true or not. So when I was with my adoptive mom, she was really trying to create her own daughter instead of me. So I was never really allowed to discuss my mom or the fact that I was Brazilian or about the part of my life where I lived in Brazil. So I really became mute when I got into foster care and I finally got adopted. And not only did I become mute, but I didn't have anybody around me that was fluent in Portuguese or in touch with that culture living in Virginia. So I completely just lost the language altogether, even though it was the first language that I was spoken to, and I still did understand it returning back to the States because I lived with my mother, who was very fluent in Portuguese, hardly understood English. So being stripped away from the land and from my mother allowed me to just bury that part of me altogether. And even after leaving Virginia and going to Massachusetts and winding up in a town that was very heavily Brazilian, where I lived was a town called Framingham, and it has the largest Brazilians population per capita in the United States. But I'll never forget going to school, and I had a conversation with a young man who just thought I was black. And I am Afro-Brazilian, so I am black. But the moment he heard I was Brazilian, he told me that he now can see how I'm pretty because he no longer thought I was a black girl. And I also had other interactions with people who were Brazilian there that never believed that I was Brazilian. If I told any of the pretty white skinned Brazilian girls that I was Brazilian, they wouldn't believe me. And they would give me tests like, can you speak Portuguese? Well, no, I can't speak Portuguese. Well, obviously you can't be Brazilian. I forgot a lot of the native foods that come from that country because, well, I was there when I was a little girl. And even though I ate that food at that point in my life, I have been molded into whatever family, into whatever dynamic I was in at that time. So forgive me if I didn't have the quickest memory when it came to the food that I used to eat when I was young. But I allowed the bullying to just come because it's just coming from my peers. I have family members trying to tell me that I'm not this, so I guess I must not be Brazilian. I even had a best friend who was Brazilian, and because I couldn't really digest her teaching me numbers when we were drinking, I all of a sudden don't care enough to learn the language of Portuguese again. But she didn't know the traumatic experiences I dealt with when I was living there, and that psychologically my brain doesn't feel safe enough to even remember these numbers. Even though I went to preschool in Brazil, I learned those numbers. I was literally in uniform going to school. And again, it was my first language, but my trauma and the way my life turned out after returning, of course, I'm not just going to sit here and remember what the numbers are while you're trying to teach them to me drunk. And you want to compare me to an American girl, and obviously she takes this more serious because it's fun for her. The memory of Brazil was never fun for me. And living in a community that didn't allow me to really explore myself reinforced the narrative of like, maybe that part of me isn't true. Maybe I'll never be in touch with that side of me again. And so I never felt like I could revisit because there was no safe space for me to revisit. And when I really started to find my inner child again, I was like, wow, I'm heavily Brazilian. And through the process of EMDR and being able to finally process my sexual abuse that I endured for years there, I started to wanting to explore that part of me, the joys and all the things that I learned there aside of the sexual trauma that I experienced there. And so I started to take Portuguese classes and Duolingo, and I started to do it consistently. And one day I was just like, I'm gonna go there. There's no better way than to face your fears head on and teach that little me that we can go back there now and be present in my body now and have a completely different experience than what I had when I was a little girl. And I booked the trip, and leading up to the trip, there were so many emotions I was going through. I was terrified, not only because I was going to a place where I experienced the most trauma in my life, but also because I'm doing my first international trip solo. I think in the journey of self-discovery, you have to do things in a space of solitude so you can really learn who you are and show up for yourself in a way that you never have before, because you don't have other energies to rely on. You just have yourself, and you have to create your world. And I've been in a space of solitude for quite some time now, and I knew I had to go to Brazil by myself the first time because there was so many emotions that I was going to have to process leading up to the journey and actually being there. And the month prior to my vacation, I found myself journaling every day, and I was kind of psyching myself out, like, am I going to be able to get through this? I felt like I was going to be crying every day. I thought it was going to be so depressing to go back to this land because I kind of was living in the memory of like family and remembering that I don't have contact with my mom. I kept remembering that I'm not native in the tongue. Like a lot of bad memories were coming forth, right? So I had to sit with that. The only way through is to go through it and to allow the emotions to come and to sit with them. And I allowed myself that space to do that. And that meant my life had to get really quiet and really still. More quiet and more still than it was prior to that. So I kind of slowed down on the FaceTime conversations and just going out altogether because I really had to be present with myself and my inner child and learn what my body is trying to tell me, what my inner child is trying to tell me. And I realized like we were terrified, but we're going to get through this because present me is more than capable of creating the life and the experiences that I want, and making sure that my inner child also can do the activities and kid-like enjoyment that she wants, and that I have the power to keep me safe, to keep us safe. And I knew it was very vital for me to clear my vessel before I went, because in order for me to receive all that I needed to receive there spiritually, I needed space. I needed to be cleared. So I did a juice cleanse before leaving, and that was 2 days, but each one day that you do a juice cleanse, that takes one day that you have to eat plant-based. So I ended up doing a fast for 4 days, and that was something new in itself, because once upon a time I never thought I was going to be disciplined enough to care about myself so much where I could focus on my diet. And it's so important because your gut health and your brain health are directly correlated. So the more you do start to love on yourself, the more you do care about the things that you intake. And I'm just so happy that I got to a place where I really started to care about what I'm putting in my body and making sure that I have enough space to receive messages from God, from source. And I'm so happy that I did, because I was so open and I received so much just from being present and from calling and praying to my ancestors that they keep me safe and they keep me guided and protected and continue to pour wisdom into me while I was there. From day 1 into day 8 that I was there, my travels were safe. My bag got there safely. Every interaction I had, 9 times out of 10, they led to spiritual conversations, which I don't think is of a coincidence. I think sometimes strangers can hold messages for you that are stronger than the people you hold close to you. And you have to be open to receiving messages that come from divine. You have to be heightenedly aware. And I was that. Every conversation that I had with a stranger at the beach somehow led to spirituality. The first woman that I met at the beach ends up opening up to me, telling me how she had to escape Venezuela because of politics and oppression that she was experiencing in her homeland, to finding a new life of joy in Brazil, and how much she's been able to find herself through dance and through music. And she also taught me a new way of learning the language. She suggested that I learn songs in Portuguese that I really enjoy and write down the lyrics and translate them to English so I can understand fluently what the music is. How genius is that? How would I have learned that if I wasn't open to trusting a stranger? People say that Brazil is so dangerous and that you can't trust anybody to watch your things and you have to be so hyper vigilant. And although that may be true, I feel like the news and the media has a way of making things much more evil than it is. I feel like there is much more good in the world than there is bad. And I also think that has to do with your perspective. You can choose to be as optimistic or as pessimistic as you want in this life. And whatever you choose to believe in shall become your reality. And I chose to trust. I chose to be optimistic. And I never got robbed. I never felt like I was in danger. I never felt like I was unsafe the whole time I was there. And I thank God for that. I also met another stranger on the beach who felt comfortable enough to come to me and reveal to me that he just decided to quit his job and he's going to be on a self-exploration journey for the next 1.5 years because his job was draining him and he didn't understand the 9-to-5 lifestyle, and his family members weren't feeling right with him. And we finally got to the point where we were talking about his experiences as a young boy and how he finally started to do things that he always dreamt of in his adulthood, and his parents were bringing him a lot of shame for it. And how sometimes when you are the generational curse breaker in your life, your family that was the ones who created the generational behaviors that you are now breaking aren't going to be happy with you. And so it is going to be a lot of separation and sometimes complete cutoffs on this journey of self-discovery and being the black sheep. And it's not easy. And for myself, hearing people come to me and tell me their stories of self-exploration. One man in particular came to me and told me that he was working in high-tech sales positions and was making very good money. And one day he got fired, and 3 days later his grandfather died, which finally pushed him into what he always wanted to do, which was to write. And now he is on his 10th autobiography books. He writes for other families, and the first one he wrote for himself. And that came from the expression of vulnerability. And he opened up the conversation talking about vulnerability. And I'm just so glad I was open to these experiences because it allowed for me to realize that trusting things that I know about myself that may not be ideal. I don't want to say ideal, but normal or safe. And knowing that there is space for that other side of me, the part of me that enjoys being vulnerable, because I know it has the power to heal so many other people. Knowing that I can too lean into that and trust that that will take me wherever it needs to take me. Trust that I'm not crazy for wanting to return home so I can return and make an episode about my journey there. I felt like my inner child was so pleased to be back in a place where the only language that was around was Portuguese, and to challenge myself. By the time it was time for me to leave, I was comfortable enough hearing conversations, and I got back to a place where I was like, oh, I actually do understand this language. I know what people are talking about. I know how to order food. I may not be completely fluent in the language yet, but it doesn't mean that I one day won't be. I very much feel confident that I will one day be fluent in the language. And I'm happy and proud of myself that I was able to converse enough to get myself through. I was able to sometimes hold conversations without having to pull out Google Translate, which is honestly just a part of me that felt really happy. It felt really good to walk around and remember the uniform that I used to wear when I was a kid going to school. One of my Airbnbs was literally right up the street from a school, and they wear the same uniform that I did when I was a little girl, the white shirt with the navy blue shorts. And I had acai bowl for breakfast, and there were two young girls who just left out of school, and I was able to buy them breakfast. Why? Because I know that I was so happy when I was a little girl and somebody seen me and wanted to do a kind act for me, and they had no idea how far that went, because I experienced a lot of pain, and a lot of my joy came from outside sources that weren't my family. So I felt called to return the favor. Now it's my time to be the one that gives. And I felt just so honored that God allowed me to be in a place where I could pay forth that act of kindness. And it really is about the community at the end of the day. And I love that I was able to give my inner child that beach carefree lifestyle. No wonder why I'm so obsessed with going to the beach. Well, the Brazilian culture, that is like the biggest part of their culture. If they're not working and they have time to go to the beach, best believe they're going to be there. And I just was happy that I was able to connect these little dots. I remember going past parks and being like, wow, I used to go there and hang out there, and seeing like just how the food and the restaurant works, and being to really like recognize and identify with that, because I did grow up in another country, and that was what I first remembered, in the first years of my life. So it was really nice to kind of reconnect with that part of me. I remember I went to a samba bar, and the person that took me spoke some words that really were powerful. And they were like, you say you don't sing, but you sing, and you say you don't dance, but you dance. And as a little girl, that's what I love to do. I love to sing, I love to dance. And maybe that's not what I wanted to do professionally, but I'm allowed to enjoy hobbies, and I don't need to feel like they need to be perfect. And I also don't need to allow the bullying that came from my peers and my parents to keep me constricted from self-expression. So what if I like to sing? So what if I like to dance? I don't need to sound perfect or move perfect to simply be present in the act. We deserve the right to take up space to indulge in things that make us feel good, and do it confidently and freely. And I'm glad that somebody came to me to tell me that, so I can let go of whatever is holding me back, which is essentially my pain, my trauma. But that's not real anymore, And I showed myself that. The past is real, and it was so traumatic that it kept us in a loop. But now, like, we're breaking free from those. terrible things, and we're creating a new book, a new life. And going there, I was able to rewrite the story of my Brazilian heritage and the part of me that I want to become, that I like to mold myself into. I know that Brazil is now going to be a place where I frequently visit. There's no place like it. And I just feel really good to be positive about the new life that I have made for myself. And everything happens for a reason. Timing is of the essence. And it was finally time for me to reemerge that part of me that was buried for so long into the core of my being. And the truth is, I am very much a Brazilian woman. And I love that part of me. Regardless if there's family members around or not, I'm able to create the family that I want and the connections that I want. And I feel like I've never been so confident in that before until now. So if you feel called to do some investigation into your lineage, into your heritage, into your ancestral line, there is no better way to do that than to go visit the place that you are thinking about, that you're questioning about. I learned so much about my ancestral line just from simply going to Afro-Brazilian museums there. My mother's heritage line comes from Angola and the Republic of Congo in Africa. And I learned so much about just the heritage there through museums and reading and being in Little Africa and visiting like favelas and staying next to favelas. Like, just immerse yourself in the reality. That's the best way to experience life, is to go, not to live vicariously through other people online. Go and see it for yourself. Little me loves to explore, loves to be spontaneous, and I deserve to give that to myself from now until forever. Thank you so much for listening to me sharing my journey, and I hope this helps somebody gain the confidence to do a little bit more investigation into themselves and to revisit a part of themselves that is essentially scared to be for whatever reason. You owe it to yourself. Until next time, thank you. Bye.